The following is a local resident producer's program. The program content is the sole responsibility of the producer and does not necessarily reflect the views or policies of CATV2, Oshkosh Community Media Services, the City of Oshkosh, or Time Warner Cable.
Hi everyone, welcome to Eye on Oshkosh. Cheryl, Hentz, and Dan Rylance here, and very pleased to be joined for the very first time ever in all these years we've been on the air by Jim Fitzhenry. He's the managing editor of the Oshkosh Northwestern, and since Stu Rickman has taken on greater responsibilities over there, he doesn't have the kind of time that he used to, but we're grateful you've got some time that you carved out of your schedule to come over. And we're going to talk about a lot of things tonight. We're going to talk about the primary election that we recently held, the upcoming general election, different issues going on in the city and the school district, and some exciting changes happening at the Northwestern as well. So anyway, welcome again. Thanks for being here. Well, let's talk about the election. We're taping this just a couple days after the primary was held. It won't air for another week or so, but the numbers obviously aren't going to change. They are what they are. So, were there any surprises with the primary that you felt either personally or as a newsman?
No, I think the turnout is exactly what you'd expect for a primary election where there's not any hot button issues on the ballot. You had candidates who placed well, who have good name recognition. You had incumbents do very well. So it was pretty well a typical primary election, unlike 2008, say, when you had presidential candidates on the ballot and the turnout just spiked up to close to 40%. So February primaries are typically low turnout. Candidates who have good name recognition have signs out. You know, the fundamentals of campaigning and the fundamentals of incumbency come into play here.
Well, one thing that I think surprised the two of us, Dan and I, was, you know, the very tight race all night between Alan Seaman and Ronald Kane Hardy. You know, they both serve on a board where they're appointed by the city, but Ron has been, I think, in the public eye more by way of his blog, Main Street Oshkosh, that's been out there for a while, and yet, you know, clearly Alan was banging on a bunch of doors. I mean, I saw that guy all over town, it seems, and he knocked on our door. So, you know, but I didn't see Ron out and about, although I'm sure he probably was. But that race really kind of surprised me that it was as close as it really was.
And that was for the last seat.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it wasn't like it was for the top spot. It was for the
well,
last seat.
if you look at the only person who finished above them was Steve Herman, and Steve Herman is another first-time candidate who did very well, but he was in a very visible law enforcement career.
It's very well
And
connected.
so people know him, know his name, know who Steve Herman is. He had signs up the earliest that I could detect on the east side of Oshkosh. So again, that name recognition, people know Steve Herman, Ron Kane Hardy. I think we always have to factor in that people like us who follow politics, local politics, really closely know the names, know the players, read the blogs. I'm not sure how that plays into a low turnout primary where citizens don't know these folks.
Yeah.
Do you think this was a name identification election rather than issues? Were there any issues on this for the council?
On a primary election, there's usually not a lot of real sharp and distinctive issues, and because it comes up so close after the start of the year and the start of the campaign, hasn't been a real lot of time to define the issues.
Sure.
There's not any one single issue in city government now that is driving things that people are going to be talking about or debating or making part of their campaign. So, and you've had some general campaigns out there where people are talking about very unspecific issues. So nobody has really had an opportunity to stake out a sharp position or a sharp personality on a topic.
What about the judicial race? What did you make of that?
I think in our follow-up coverage, John Jorgensen, who did the best in the election, said he didn't quite know what to make of it going into it. You had 5 people who are very well known in the legal community, a little bit in the political community, but again, you never know until you get your name out there on a ballot. You never know how the general public is going to pick that out. John Jorgensen, it's a nonpartisan race, but you look at the supporters, who people list, and you can kind of get an indication of who's backing them. John Jorgensen had the backing of the local Republican Party. I always base it on the Hurt factor.
Yes.
If you look
Mike
at who,
Hurt letter.
who
Yeah.
Mike Hurt is supporting, Mike is a long-term Winnebago County Republican. And if you look at who Mike is supporting, you have a pretty good idea of who's being supported by mainstream Republicans. So I think John had a push from people. John had run for office a couple of times, run for the judicial position, so he had the benefit of name recognition. And you know, all 5 candidates had literature, all 5 candidates placed ads, so you know, you had a really unusual race where you had people who understood that the primary was going to be a battle.
Well, and of course, all those folks who voted for the 3 who didn't make it through, those votes are going to have to go somewhere. And then, of course, whoever happens to vote in the general that didn't come out for the primary. Any predictions, Jim, on what you think is going to happen with those votes?
I think it's safe to assume that it's going to be a tight race. I think Edmund Jelinski campaigned throughout the county, had signs throughout the county, had a visible organization throughout the county. So I think it's going to be a tight race. I think you've got 2 young, articulate candidates who, when they debate and go head-to-head, get a chance to come on your show here maybe. You're going to see some different styles and different stances being taken. So I think it'll be a pretty lively, and it'll be a good campaign. And it's good when you get judicial candidates who can come out and talk and be serious about issues and do something a little bit more than just kind of vague platitudes about things in the system. So I think it'll be a good race.
Okay.
And let's go back to the consuls for a minute. There's less new votes with the consul because only one is eliminated, unlike the judgeship, where there are a lot of votes that were cast in the primary. Well, assuming they vote again, they got to go somewhere else. What do you think the front runners are? I mean, there's a big vote difference between 1, 2, 3, and 5 and 6, for example. Do you see that changing?
I think Burke Tower is an incumbent with great name recognition. I think he's defined himself very well. People know who he is. They know where he's coming from. I think Burke is going to do very well. Steve Cummings, this is his 2nd time on the ballot. He came very close last year to being put on the council. There was quite a bit of discussion about whether or not he should have been appointed to Mayor Esslinger's seat. I think a lot of his supporters felt that he was unfairly overlooked for that seat. I think his supporters are going to be very, very motivated to come out and vote this April. And I think for the 3rd spot, I wouldn't count out Brian Peschel.
Did that surprise you a little bit on his vote?
Brian has done very, very well the times that he's gone out there. He was swept into office the same year that John Dell'Antonia lost his seat. And the defining issue for that was the regulations of where people could park campers and boats in their yards. And Brian was really swept in on a very, on a plank of saying, you know, people have parked their boats and their recreational vehicles in their yards for a long time. City Hall shouldn't come down unfairly on people, and he was swept into office. And you know, that's again where Brian has got excellent name recognition. He's a recognizable figure. And I think the 3rd seat will be the big question.
Well, and Brian's a South Sider too, and that tends to carry a lot of weight in most of the local elections.
Now, unlike the primary, the Northwestern will endorse for the April election. Is that correct? Both
Yes.
for school board and for and for judge, all
Yes.
3. So you're going to have to do a lot of interviews too.
We are going to have to
Yeah.
do interviews, and you know, as you know, it's a time-consuming
It is.
process.
Yeah.
but there's no better way to get
Yeah.
to know candidates,
Absolutely.
to get them to discuss issues. We always work really hard to ask them a consistent set of questions so
Right.
that you can judge people based on their responses to that. It's good to see how people react to questions they maybe hadn't thought of, and to get their thinking and their thought process on issues. So it's time-consuming, but it's a very gratifying thing to be able to.
And local endorsements at local level probably, endorsement for president doesn't mean anything at local level, but local endorsements for local offices, I think the newspaper is a factor in those.
For some people, factor of how they will vote or won't
no,
vote
no,
or
either way,
not
kiss of
vote.
death,
So
you're right.
It works both ways on that.
I said issues weren't important for the primary. Could you pick out, you've been editorializing on some of the current issues. Are there 2 or 3 issues that are current that you think will translate into issues that the candidates will address or run on? Or
Property taxes are always
Okay.
a substantial issue.
more in the school board maybe than the council? Or?
I think the schools are in a position with the state budget where they have a lot more latitude of what they can do with their tax increases, where the state really put it back on school districts.
Right.
The city is still going to be locked into a pretty tight box of how much they can raise taxes, but I think people are going to be talking about taxation. They're going to be talking about infrastructure. There's a lot of stormwater drainage issues that have to be addressed, and I think that those will be, very meat and potatoes issues. We hired a new community development director. I think that there are going to be questions about how that department is going to be engaged in the community in the Near East neighborhood with some of the neighborhood initiatives, with inspections, and how that office is going to take place. There's been some substantial vacancies in City Hall, and I think that there's going to be some attention paid to how these new department heads, particularly community development, which has been a lightning rod for a lot of years,
For sure.
how that's going to fit in.
And high expectations for a change.
Well, I think that in the case of the Near East neighborhood, there was a financial commitment from the private sector with the community foundation to really get in the neighborhood, start to channel some public and private money and really do some things, and that's been completely put on hold. So I think that's going to be a barometer of how the next community development director does.
Now, Jim, you had said that, of course, you're going to be doing candidate interviews. Did I also understand an email from you that you're going to be doing a candidates forum as well?
Yes, we last year started doing live stream debates. It's funny to see a bunch of print journalism people learn some of this technology and begin to do it, but the cost of the technology has come down. The equipment that we have is part of an effort to get the newspaper to be active on many platforms, internet, live streaming, video. We sponsored debates starting in the fall of 2008. We did them again in the spring of 2009, and we're getting ready to do them again this spring in March.
Okay.
And we'll be using much of the same format. Our city editor, Carl Liebert, will be moderating.
Okay.
We're bringing in the candidates. We're hoping to get more of a true debate format, which has been kind of hard to do at the League of Women Voters forums when they're trying to cover a lot of ground in a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to maybe focus on fewer issues but more depth and detail to get the candidates thinking on issues.
Well, and that's been a chief complaint, I think, about the League of Women Voters Forum, is that there isn't a whole lot of room for debate between the candidates. And the other complaint that I've heard for years is that it does not allow you to really, it doesn't allow someone in the audience, or one of the moderators for that matter either, or the panelists, to actually ask a specific question of a specific candidate. I think it is fair to ask an incumbent about their particular voting issue on, maybe a real controversial subject or something along those lines. And, if you're not given that opportunity, then the public doesn't get to hear their thoughts on that.
And they've really been the pioneers on this, and they've really done a great job of keeping it going, keeping the forums going, and so we're just trying to add another voice and another debate out there, another tool for voters. There's never too much of a supply of information for people, so it's another venue. Tune into the League of Women Voters Forum, tune into ours, watch Eye on Oshkosh, get a chance to learn about people and a lot of times, citizens and community members ask better questions than the trained journalist in a forum like that. So the student forums for school board have been exceptionally good.
They really have, yeah.
Because, it's easier for a politician to kind of blow off a reporter, but don't try and blow off a high school student who really wants an answer to his or her questions.
Well,
So-
I don't know, our school board kind of blew off a whole bunch of students recently, and we can talk about that when we
Yeah.
get to that point.
Yeah.
But did you have anything else on the election, Dan?
Well, just kind of a general, is the city headed in the right direction? Mark Roloff has been city manager. Do you sense that we've changed and we're moving more in the right direction now? Or?
Well, I don't know if you can answer that question solely on what Mark Roloff
Okay.
can or cannot do.
Okay.
That's a really high satellite image kind of picture.
But his leadership is important.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the problems I see is that we have elected officials who are operating outside of the parameters of the city manager system of government. And I think the issue is brought up in terms of how much they're meddling or micromanaging in things. We had a council meeting late last year where they were talking about the new development that was going in Pearl Marion, and the issue came up of were there going to be bike racks and where were the bike racks going to be placed. And I thought that, and it was a question a council member had for city staff, and I thought, that's really not a question that anybody should elect somebody to the common council to answer, that was a staff question, and that it could have been handled outside of a meeting. And I think that that's an example of where people expect the council to set the broad policy that says, in a public project, we would like to see bike racks and other amenities that could allow people to get around with ease. Their job isn't so much to get in and say, we want a bike rack every 25 feet, and if there happens to be a tree here, this is where the bike rack goes. And so I think that that's one of the issues that I think could be frustrating Mark Roloff a little bit, that in this system of government, the city manager has wide latitude and executive-like powers to execute the policy that the council sets. And I think that quite often you see the council getting into areas far outside of policy.
Do you think there are less micromanagers that are candidates in April than there are micromanagers that are currently on the council?
I think that that's what we're going to find out in the
Okay.
campaign. I think that when you get candidates in and you talk to them, it's certainly a question I'm going to have for candidates of, what is your job on the council? And I think that in the past, a lot of people have said, well, it's like being on a board of directors. And I think that you see a pendulum swing on the councils of how they approach it. We went through a period where when Bill Castle was mayor, he was very hands-off in that. He thought the council had to do very specific things, set the policy, we hire a good city manager, let him do his job, and that's his job. And then you came a pendulum swing where we had new people put on the council who wanted to roll up their sleeves and dive into some more of these details. And I think that the pendulum is going to start to swing back a little bit because either approach has its pros and cons, but there have been times as an observer where I thought, the balance of power is getting out of whack here, where we hired a city manager, give him time to do his job and make his case.
See, one of the complaints I've heard from a couple of the council members, Jim, is that, this term micromanaging, we've all tossed it around, probably more than maybe we should have. And yet, while we say on the one hand, you guys are micromanaging, on the other hand, it's the Bill Castle total hands-off approach that probably got us into, at least partially got us into, some of the messes that we were in with department heads kind of doing their own thing, somewhat misleading the
notification.
council, no notification of certain things. And maybe this council is, because Mark Roloff is still really new and probably doing a fairly good job, I think, given what he had to work with and so forth, and some of the problems that he had inherited when he came. But they're maybe a little gun shy based on some of the things that have happened. How can they bridge that gap, if you will, so that they're kind of hands-on and yet not being accused of micromanaging?
Well, I think it's always a balancing act, and there's no real right or wrong answer for that.
Yeah.
I think part of it is, the mayor does preside over the meeting, and I think it would be good for the mayor in some cases to rule somebody out of order or to make a point of order on that. I think that there are Robert's Rules of Order. I think that the mayor can play a really positive role in doing that, where if he sees something getting off track, where somebody's getting too much into outside of policy details, that he can hit the gavel and
Yeah.
rule somebody out of order. And I think it's just an awareness of that would help as well. But there's no question that there was a period in time there where counselors felt like they came to a meeting and they were absolutely walloped by something that they didn't know about, or they got a memo late in a day, and that will make people gun shy. And I think that part of the political process is that you're going to get candidates talking about moderating some of that, and that's how the system works.
Okay.
Can we move on from the city?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, move to the school board a little bit. You mentioned earlier the comment that, the students, you did a really good job. It was 2 days ago in the Northwestern, John Limburger, one of the board members, was quoted as saying, I'll just read it really short, I just thought there was a lot of paranoia on part of the students. They came in with conclusions that will hurt their schedules, and maybe they should have waited until they understood what's going on. What's your response to that? The students are paranoid because they came to a public forum?
After reading through the lines of some of that story and some of the comments that Interim Superintendent Betty Lang had made about perhaps the principals in the report that they delivered overstated their case a little bit,
Right.
I got the impression that the staff at the high schools could have been pitching a worst case scenario to students.
Right.
And students fed into that and really came with a strong opinion on that might have been slightly exaggerated. And I think that's her words, that,
Yeah.
and she apologized for
Yeah.
having that case be overstated, where I think the students came in there through no fault of their own with the wrong impression about how much was going to be cut and how many classes could be eliminated.
But then for him also to say that they should have waited until they understood what's going on. The board and the administration at this point doesn't know what's going on either.
And they're the ones who sent out the report.
Yeah, so I mean, I don't know. I
It
thought it was
was-
a strange statement.
It was probably unfair criticism for students.
Yeah.
And, we printed a letter to the editor from Ron Harold, who
Complimented the students.
complimented the students on the great job they did.
Yeah.
And I think that the students, unlike some of the parents and community members who've appeared at sessions, really set a very high standard for how you do it.
You bet.
And I don't see any bad thing that could come out of young people standing up at a microphone and addressing the board in a real thoughtful way that really drives home what's at stake here. It kind of takes some of the antisepticness out of it, of a building report or some of the PowerPoint slideshows that they like to do so often, that you see the faces of kids and understand that there's something more concrete there, something more real at stake.
We're on the eve of the selection of the new superintendent. They had public forums for each of the candidates on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of this week. Any feedback from that at all? Any impressions you have on I know you had an article or a nice synopsis of each of the candidates' views in the paper. Any more thoughts on the three candidates?
I didn't personally have a chance
Okay.
to attend any of those sessions. We had our education reporter, Adam Rodewald, attended all three. He said that each of the candidates made a public statement and talked about what they saw happening in Oshkosh. And the board is going to be going in closed session on Friday and deliberating about that. When we're going to know who they've hired and when that happens is still kind of up in the air.
Okay. I want to go back to this public forum that they had at Alberta Kimball, where all these students spoke. Some of the students, most of them in fact, were so articulate and so just profound with some of their thoughts, very thoughtful in their approach, very polite. I mean, the decorum was outstanding. And yet they just, in addition to Lemberger's comment, you know, the ultimate decisions made by the board really were kind of, I think a lot of citizens are saying, it was really kind of a slap in the face to these kids. You know, do you think as a parent and as a taxpayer, not necessarily as a newsman, but either way, if you want to talk on it from a newsman's point of view, do you think that, you know, that was kind of a slap in the face to the students for the board to have made the decisions that they made?
Well, I think it's through what context you look at the cuts that they had to make and what is really at stake. From what subsequently it sounds like, that if a class has fewer than 25 students, it could be in jeopardy of not being offered, but it would be offered the next year. So I think if you look at it from that perspective, rather than radical cuts are being made in elective and high quality classes, then I think you have a different perspective on that. It's hard when so much information is released and so much information comes out there to try and digest it and understand it as a newspaper person, as a citizen, as a parent. It's really difficult to keep up with that because you know, when they went through the various scenarios for what they would cut, you know, there's 10 or 15 pages on there. Yeah. And you could tell that board members themselves who are really immersed in this, and some of the board members have served for years, it's tough to follow this. So I think that in the end result, the cuts are not going to be as bad as anybody had feared. And I think the real harsh side of it is that there is a substantial number of people who don't want to see property taxes raised for school. I get people who will call me in my office. I had an elderly gentleman call me up after some of the articles were published about the 2 meetings at North and West where they went over the scenarios, and he just said, I can't afford any more property taxes. And it makes me angry that they could potentially tax to the max. Do they understand that my bills are going up too? And so there is a deep sentiment in the community that says, I can't afford any more taxes, please don't raise them. And so it's difficult when you're on the board level trying to balance that of saying we need to maintain high quality education while also understanding that there are people out in the community who are hurting. So it's a tough job, and you know, the state legislature really put school districts in a really bad position, and I think that that's one part of this that has really not been discussed much, is that this is because of the state budget. It's a state budget that we were told didn't raise taxes, but taxes are going up anyway as a result of the budget. And so there might be a clause in here for truth in budgeting that you know, looks at the real choices, and you know, the state didn't live up to its 2/3 education funding, and that's why the district is in the financial situation it is. It's happening in Appleton, it's happening in Neenah, it's happening in Green Bay.
Happening all over the country. You know, it really is. And there's some states that are in worse shape than Wisconsin, and certainly some districts that are in worse shape than Oshkosh. And you know, and yet I hear the argument from some of the other people saying, well, you know, the state has put us in this predicament, and if we don't tax to the max that we're allowed, which I think that's kind of got a bad connotation attached to it, but if we don't tax to the max that the state allows us to, we're always going to have a shortfall. We're always, you know, you can only cut so much in programming, you can only cut so much in staff, and you know, you're always going to be in a deficit position where you're always going to have to cut things then. So it's a tough nut to crack, it really is.
Now this current board, I think on my taxes for '09, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, school board taxes went up 5.5%. You know, they could go up to, I think, 12 or 13 if they wanted. But so they have, and I think the school board race clearly is Dan Becker, who represents what Jim said a minute ago, the pain of the taxpayer on the one hand, and not to overgeneralize, but it appears to me that the other candidates, with the exception of one, Mr. Daggett, are more flexible in being willing maybe to not necessarily tax to the max, but to go up, maybe even mention that word referendum, although but I mean, they're more on the other side of it. So it would appear to me that there'll be well, if Becker wins, there, but there could be 2 votes, more than likely the other side, to replace Bowen and Claude Thompson, who I think were for that increase. So it might be a status quo result with a slight lead or a slight majority to continue to raise taxes. I don't know how high.
Yeah.
But I think that'll be a key issue. And I think there's only one candidate who's really absolutely firm, on no tax increases at all, and that's Dan Becker.
Yeah.
Move to the state maybe a little bit? Or
Yeah.
you want to go with more local things?
Well, I had one thing that we didn't cover on a state thing, and it's
Okay.
more on an editorial that you wrote. Paul Esslinger recently took you in particular to task on the editorial that you wrote on the Oshkosh Corp trucks being parked or stored, whatever word you want to attach to it. And in taking you to task for that, Jim, he brought up, and I think he was actually wrong on this, but maybe you spoke out about it too, but I know your wife was at the Plan Commission meeting. He correlated your position on Oshkosh Corp with a center, a recovery club, whatever you want to call it, that was going into your neighborhood where you live for people who suffer from addictions. And your wife, as I said, was at the Plan Commission meeting and spoke out on that one. And he said, well, here he is, he's kind of being hypocritical. He's calling these people unpatriotic, but yet he didn't want something in his own neighborhood. Thoughts on that?
Well, that was a column I wrote, and an editorial is the position of the newspaper from the newspaper's editorial board. You're talking about a column that I wrote, which is of
Your own
my own
personal
personal
editorial.
opinion.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I want to make sure people understand the difference
Yeah.
between that.
Yeah.
That was a case where my wife, who is married to a newspaper man, didn't sign a disclosure or a form that said you can't exercise your First Amendment rights, that you can't come and redress your government and come up to the microphone, state your name, give your address, and speak out of how you feel about that issue. I don't live next to the Solutions Recovery Center. I live about half a block away from it. My wife did go and speak to the Plan Commission. She spoke to the council and just did what every citizen has a right to do. I personally never spoke out on it publicly. It was a case where ethically, I'm obligated to let my superiors know that I have a potential conflict of interest on an issue. When it came up, when we were notified, I went to my boss, Stu Rickman, and I said, this issue is coming up. It's a couple houses away from where I live. I'm going to have to recuse myself from taking part in any editorial board discussions if there were to be it, or to be part of any of the news coverage on that. That just happens because it happens close to your home.
Sure.
You can't be objective about it. And so I recused myself from that. I think that this is a case where he was comparing apples and oranges. And so I wrote the column about the neighbors with Oshkosh truck. I stated at the top of the column that I was taking some liberty as a writer and how I felt about that. It's really kind of a moot point now. The company is pulled out of there. I think that it's different if you live 5 houses away from what was a church and the group had to go through and get a conditional use permit to use that building. So they were doing something that was outside of the zoning for that. What was happening at Oshkosh Corporation and what they were looking to use the land for was part of the zoning, the storage, the parking. So people bought homes in an area that was near an airport that was zoned industrial. And so I think it's an apples to oranges comparison.
Okay. I just wanted to give you a chance to respond to that because, you could have any Sunday that you wanted to, but you didn't, probably because you already had spoken out and it was kind of a moot point, but I wanted to give you that chance.
Can I
anyway.
follow up on that a little
Oh,
bit?
yeah, sure.
I think the whole one spouse responsible for the actions of the other spouse is really dangerous. I think if you're married or your other person has just as much right to have an
Yeah.
independence as the other one and to hold one person responsible. The other comment I'd make, I had your job for 4 years in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And I wrote a lot of editorials that upset public officials and et cetera. but not once in my 4 years did a public official use a public portion meeting of the regular meeting to attack me or the newspaper. They would call me, they would swear at me, and they'd come down and demand a special meeting with the editorial board. They would beat up my kids at school. But it was never, and I find that strange that both Tony Palmieri and Esslinger use public time to run their war against Northwestern. Do they ever come down and talk to you or call you personally?
No.
No.
No,
I didn't
they
think
don't.
so.
But they're not the only ones who have done it over the years.
No?
I mean, there have been other council
I
members
understand
who
that,
have done that.
but to me
and
that's-
maybe they just
Maybe
shouldn't
that's
do
the
it, period.
Oshkosh disease or something that they don't. But I find that very strange that you would use, go down and look Fitzhenry. I never got a call before 10 in the morning that was complimentary. I just didn't, and fine. That's part of the deal. But I don't think we ought to use public meetings to attack the media.
Okay.
That's
All
my
right.
editorial for the night.
All right, excellent. All right. Well, hopefully you won't get any nasty calls about that one.
Yeah.
Okay, well, so you want to move on to state?
Yeah,
national?
we
Okay.
kind of nibbled a little bit about the state not living up to their 2/3 for the school. What is the status of the economy, and how bad is tax revenues off now, and are we looking at a worse scenario for next year and the year after?
I'm referencing a Milwaukee Journal Sentinel story that was posted January 27th. They said that according to the latest budget projections that come in 219.5 million less than expected, but it's not requiring immediate action from the legislature to cut spending to get that back into the line.
Okay.
So I think that the drop isn't as pronounced as it was, that
Okay.
it's stabilizing, but I think that there's no question that over the next 12 months, they're going to have to come back in and do some cuts. The governor talked about that in his State of the State address. The economy is stabilizing. We're seeing some signs of life in retail sectors, but I think that they're going to have to come back in and make some more cuts in state government. And they talk in the Journal Sentinel story with Senator Mike Ellis, who's really one of the budget hawks.
Right. From Nina. Yeah.
Who's talked for years about the structural deficit. I think every student in Wisconsin should be able to view a videotape of Senator Ellis doing his he goes to a board
Okay.
and he'll tell you how the structural deficit works. He visited the Northwestern's editorial board a number of years back, and he can lay out all the numbers for you on a blackboard, and only the way Senator Ellis can do it. And it's highly effective because you can see in black and white where the problem started and how the state perpetually runs a structural deficit, which basically pushes its bills into the next biennium, which means that every budget, every 2 years, the number keeps getting bigger, the hole you have to plug is bigger, and when your tax collections are going dramatically down, you get massive billion-dollar budget deficits.
I wonder if Glenn Beck learned the billboard or the blackboard thing from Mike Ellis. That'd be a good question to ask him.
So this is like a traveling blackboard that he uses?
Well, we have a blackboard in
Okay.
in the editorial board area, and he just went up to the blackboard and started doing it. But and in all seriousness, it's quite effective because he was somebody who knows the budget inside and out, has been a long time representative, senator, and so it's very interesting to do that from somebody from the inside who said, "Hey, we really need to change what we're doing here." And the budget has only gotten perpetually worse since that time, since he started doing that. So
I expect one of his asterisks on the bulletin board or the blackboard is when the state made the commitment for 2/3 of public education. I think he said at that point that would be a huge budget responsibility that would come to. This is early, but at the federal level, they're asking who's going to run for president in 2012 and who's going to win. What's your early sense of the gubernatorial race for the fall?
well, I think if you look what's happening nationally, I think you have to, Scott Walker would be the leading candidate. I think that he's going to be holding a big fundraiser in Milwaukee coming up here. He's having some marquee names come in and campaign and raise money for him. I think clearly Democrats have not fared well in midterm elections. You don't have to be a political scientist to look and see that they're going to lose seats. I think that you've had 8 years of Jim Doyle as governor, I think the pendulum's really going to favor swinging back to Scott Walker.
Tom Barrett seems to be sort of forced into this race. He probably could be mayor of Milwaukee until he decided not to be mayor of Milwaukee.
Well,
but
8 years ago, he wanted to be governor,
Right.
and he didn't want to be mayor.
Right.
And now he's basically, in late summer, was called by the president and asked, please
Right.
run for governor,
Right.
because we can't find anybody to run for governor.
Right.
And so it's a question of timing.
yeah,
and-
well, that race for governor 8 years ago. What was the woman out of Madison who
Kathleen
was?
Falk.
Yeah, she really gave that primary race to Doyle. If she stayed out of it, it's conceivable that Barrett could have been the nominee. But okay, move to federal a little bit.
Sure, go right ahead.
Okay. This is just a great quote. Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana, who announced earlier this week he's not running for his third time, opined that, quote, our political system is dysfunctional and it's riddled with brain-dead partisanship. Great words, dysfunctional and brain-dead partisanship. How correct is he?
I think that would be a pretty accurate assessment of where the system is at right now, but that's a reflection of where the country is at,
Yeah.
where I think people are frustrated, they're hurting,
Sure.
they're angry, they don't see the direct benefits of stimulus spending, although it could be working magic behind the scenes
Yeah.
that we're not aware of. So I think it pretty much sums up the national sentiment right now of where people are at, and they're sharply divided. And I think that a lot of the political leadership is pushing people away from any sense of unity or coming to a consensus on anything. Everything is running to the outside. And
So both Bayh and Sarah Palin then have some things in common. I mean, they're both saying that the system is dysfunctional, and although she says it's only Democrats that are dysfunctional, but okay, I want to move on to Congressman Tom Petrie, just for, I know he gets, he's kind of the moderate in Congress, and he doesn't ruffle any feathers or anything, but, those damn earmarks really bother me. He votes against all the spending bills as a Republican, but damn it, he's got all these neat little earmarks in there. Are you going to interview him for his, 18th or 16th run for Congress? And what about all these earmarks?
I think it's one of the comforts of being in the minority party, where you can vote against everything but
Wow.
still sneak in your earmarks and be able to get away with that.
Yeah.
and-
How many
and do
earmarks
that.
has he been? It's hard to keep track, but he's had a lot of them, hasn't he?
Well, important projects for the home constituents are never evil earmarks, Mr. Rylance.
Right. No, I know the other district are the
For the
evils.
other district,
I
it's
understand that, but,
It's the evil things.
Yeah.
The one thing you're dead on about the earmarks and the voting on that. One of the bills that he's working on, that he's worked on for the last 20 years, is changing the way student loans are
Right,
done.
right.
And he's been a huge proponent
He
of
has.
taking out banks as a middleman
Yep.
and charging students higher interest rates. What he wants to do is just dispense the loan money to students.
Right.
When you look at the path that bill has taken over the last 20 years, it's amazing that anything gets done.
Yeah.
And it's a good idea.
Yep.
And for the first time, it's had bipartisan support. So that might be a marquee piece of legislation.
I think that
gets
if he got
passed.
that through, I would cancel my criticism of the earmarks, because that is a good bill, and I know his party leaders are not real excited about going to the wall on that one. I think the fact that he has a lot of support from Democrats will mean that whether it'll pass or not, rather than he'll have Republican support. But okay, I'm done for a while.
Okay, all right. Did you have, I know you a lot of times have copies of editorials and sometimes Jim's own opinion page. Did you have any questions about any of those things?
Good, and this, yeah, that's a good transfer here. First, I want to compliment you on your Sunday column. When I first came to Oshkosh, you had a Monday column. And I, as a former editorial page editor, I always thought it was good to have a zinger on Monday. It kind of wakes up the community for the week. And I know you discontinued that for other responsibilities. But first, I want to compliment you on it. It's really the only op-ed piece that the Northwestern does per week, and I think it's important.
Well, and if I can just add something
Yeah.
to that, it's made Stu's departure on Sunday kind of
Yeah.
seamless.
Yeah.
I mean, Stu will be missed
Right.
by a lot of people, and Stu and I sometimes disagreed on a lot of things,
Right.
but I also had a lot of respect for the things that he wrote,
Right.
as I do for what you've written, and probably will continue to write. But it has made it a little bit
Yeah.
seamless in a
Yeah,
way.
and the continuity was kind of broke for a while when you had this person. I don't know. Sometimes you'd run them on Mondays now. I didn't think it wasn't that local, and so I'm glad that Northwestern went back to the managing editor doing the weekly column rather than someone else. So I have a couple questions. First of all, do you enjoy writing it?
I enjoyed writing it. I was editorial page editor of the paper for about 5 years. Then I was promoted to managing editor, and so that got me out of the routine of
Right.
doing daily writing of editorials and things like that. And I eventually had to give up the column because of just other duties. But when you write for a long time and you're used to doing it, the stuff still kind of pops up in your head, and you get a little start of a column or a start of a sentence or a thought of something that you think would do that. And so it's kind of satisfied that part of my brain that would come up with an idea or think this would be funny or this would be good. So I enjoy it, but it's some weeks are easier than others
Sure.
to find the
The
words.
topic is the most difficult, isn't it?
And the topic, and
Yeah.
sometimes narrowing the topic or the stuff that's too easy to do some
Yeah.
weeks.
Yeah.
You want to stay away from that and keep it fresh.
And you can't pick a fight every Sunday.
No, and I think that we also see it, Stu set a really high standard for good writing there, and we wanted to keep a voice of talking about things that are happening inside the newspaper, to open up a window into what more we're doing, so that there doesn't seem to be a deep mystery or a deep cloud hanging over what happens inside the newspaper. So we really wanted to keep that line of communication open as well.
Well, I don't think you've lost your talents in writing or wordsmith. I think you're an incredibly creative wordsmith. I mean that as a compliment.
Well, one of the funniest ones, and maybe most ingenious ones that we've talked
Now
about.
we're going to get him in trouble. No.
No,
No.
was the one where it talked about, and this was a few months ago,
Yeah.
it talked about the change at City Hall
Yeah.
and thanking the mayor for that. And I think everybody was kind of thinking, wow, is he talking about Paul Esslinger? Wow, that would be a change. And then
Yeah.
at the very end, it's like, who'd you think I was talking about?
Yeah.
And that was really, it was clever,
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether you agreed with it or not, you had to admit it was at least clever,
I had to tell one of my neighbors to go back and reread it because they missed it. I said, you better go back and reread that again.
Yeah,
They missed it.
Yeah.
I thought your one on the fire truck was clever.
Mm-hmm.
I thought your analysis of Bobby Peschel,
Bob
I call
Peschel?
him Bobby Peschel because I think he's an adolescent, was incredibly creative. I have that at home. I saved that one. Some of the word choices in there were just marvelous. Without being nasty. I mean, it was, but it was creative. So anyway.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned before about the mayor should be gaveling certain people.
Yeah.
He should have gavelled Bob Peschel on that. The city attorney didn't say anything while that dissertation was going on, and it took Dennis McHugh to
Which
pop
surprised-
up and
yeah,
say, hey, this is really out of order. So anyway, well, you talked a little bit about using columns to talk about things going on at the Northwestern. What are some of the things that are going on over there right now?
Well, we're one of the big initiatives we've taken this year is to really dramatically improve the quality of the Sunday newspaper. I hope you've noticed that the look on the front page is a little bit different. We're really taking a breakout approach of major stories. We've broken out a series a couple weeks ago on drug and alcohol courts in the state of Wisconsin. One of the very good things that happened the last session of the legislature was Winnebago County's Safe Streets program, which provides repeat drunken drivers with an opportunity to go into an alcohol court and get treatment and turn their lives around, is going to be going statewide this summer. And we've piloted this program here in Winnebago County. And so we did our first part of that series on a Sunday that looked into how do you address this really complex, very disturbing issue of drunken driving. What do you do about keeping your prison population at a manageable level? How do you break the cycle of addiction? And a program that has started here that Judge Woltz has really been the pioneer of is going to be in 72 counties across the state starting in July.
And Judge Key, too.
Yeah.
Judge Key has been a major part of that as well. So what we're trying to do is make the Sunday paper bigger, bulkier, more content in there, more enterprise reporting, more projects, and really making an effort to make the Sunday paper something special. When people have an opportunity to read, when they like to be able to settle in with the newspaper, with the ads, with all that. That's been a real major initiative for us, keeping a focus in on public affairs and First Amendment reporting, making that a major part of what we do. We're looking at tweaking some of our sections to really hone up some of the content in there. Over the next couple of months, we're going to be taking together some of the First Amendment information that we do of government meetings, how people voted, and packaging it together so that you can maybe look at it in one place, be able to see what's going on, what meetings you might want to look into. And so really just going through and dramatically improving that Sunday paper.
Well, and some people don't get the hard copy delivered to them. They read it online. There have been constant changes in that format as well. One of the, I hear a number of different complaints about it, and I'm sure you do too. I hear a lot of compliments about it, but one of the things that people are always complaining about, I think, is the fact that sometimes a story gets published twice. It'll be put online maybe late afternoon or early evening, sometimes even late at night, and then it's reposted the next morning. But if people have already commented on it, those comments don't sort of migrate with the new story that you've just published. And so people say, hey, where'd those comments go? And then they have a difficult time maybe finding the old story. They haven't figured out how to do that yet. Is there anything that can make those comments sort of be migrated to or reposted to the new story?
One of the things we've done directly dealing with that, there's no way for us to take the comments and shift them to a different place. We're doing something called Hot Story Chat.
Yeah,
where
I
if
saw that.
we throw something up late in the afternoon and there's a chat started on it, what we'll do is we can go behind the hoods of the stories and continue that into the next day's story with a HTML coding in it, because it is very frustrating for people to get started in the conversation in there and then not be able to find it. And sometimes it's amazing stories that you think people will go and comment in on chat on, they don't, but a quirky little thing will get people just going back and forth and doing that. So that's one of those tune-up maintenance things that we've tried to do to, address that very complaint.
Yeah. What about, Jim, when, sometimes you'll be looking at a story and it'll say there are like 5 comments, and sometimes there aren't any. And I know that you guys from time to time have removed comments because you've posted something saying you've removed comments for, whatever, obscenity or, making a really bad attack on someone, whatever the case may be. But then there are other times when there's just no comments there at all. Is that just kind of something in the system that needs to be tweaked, or what causes that?
The way our system works, we've got more dirty words than George Carlin that are on a list that will automatically get a post put down. Now, people have been creative in trying to string together things to get their expletives in.
I've seen it.
But in some cases, the computer code in the program in there is scrubbed automatically because one of those George Carlin dirty words comes up. And so, but it still appears on there, and that's one of the things that we'd like to get improved in it, but we're kind of stuck with the technology of where it's at. Every kind of progression technology-wise usually has like one of these maddening little quirks that you wish you could switch off, but you can't because of the way it's all stitched together and the way the system works. But that's one of them where you go in there and you see it and what's going on here. But that could be one of the,
Yeah, and it's frustrating as a reader because I'm thinking, I'd like to read these comments, and I go there and there's nothing. And it's like, well, that's disappointing. So the other thing that I know people have complained about, because I've seen their comments, is these Bing advertisements that keep popping up, you know? If your cursor accidentally hovers over a word for longer than a split second, it seems, these ads pop up. That is so annoying, and yeah, I know you can click them off by Xing them out, but people find that so annoying, and I'm one of them who says, geez, come on, I don't want to deal with these.
Well, the problem is that all of the content that comes on a website isn't free. Everything on the internet isn't free, and that's one of the tools that, you know, newspaper industry is employed, and other websites too, to earn some money on the website.
Yeah.
And for something that you get for free, the trade-off sometimes is dealing with some of those annoying pop-ups that
Yeah.
I encounter the same thing.
Yeah. So are you actually getting money then, Jim, just because it pops up, or does the person actually have to click on it for you to?
I'm not sure how we get paid on that. I think it's based on the placement on the website, and then the click-through might be
click-through,
a higher
okay.
rate. I stay far away from ad rates and money-generating things.
Probably a good thing. You've
Yeah.
got your hands full anyway. Well, the other thing that I've noticed, and this has just happened like in probably the last week or so, because as I was trying to prepare for this, I wanted to print off a couple stories. And now when you click on print this page, there's this whole new thing that comes up. It's a big orange screen, and there's ads in there. And it's like, wow, this is annoying too. So I got frustrated with that, and I didn't bother printing anything off. So I saved part of a tree, I guess. But what's that all about?
Again, another way to generate
make
online
money.
revenue. People have this view that the content that aggregators like Google are throwing around on the websites, that it's all free. And it's not. It takes, and Cheryl, you know this as a former journalist and as a journalist now, that you have to pay people, highly trained people, to go and produce the content. It's not free. The newspaper industry is really working on several different models of how to deal with the need to get the content on digital platforms, and this is the type of stuff that's happening as supporting this. It's not free, and unfortunately, we have to deal with some of these annoyances with that as the industry tries to work through, what is the model for the future with this? As less people read the printed word, and more people want it on their iPad, tablets, or whatever else is going to be developed here. And it's a huge issue, and it's going to be an issue for some time to come.
Okay. Well, and you guys, I think, have problems like that aside and annoyances like that aside. I think you guys have done a pretty amazing job. I just know that sometimes it is hard to find where things are once they've kind of passed, a few days on the front page or whatever. But if you search around enough, you can usually find it. So anyway.
And they've taken a lot of cuts.
Yes.
And there's still, that's part of newspaper business right now.
Yep. So, anyway, well, that's going to do it for us.
Yeah.
We're out of time.
Yeah.
Thanks much
Thanks,
for being
Jim, for
here.
coming. Enjoyed it.
We hope we weren't too tough on you and that you'll come back in the future.
Well, thanks.
So,
I'd love
all right.
to.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Thanks, Jim. Very
And
much.
that's going to do it for us. We will see you next time. Until then, take good care. Keep your eye on us. We've got our eye on Oshkosh.